Today, we're going to be talking with Lake Bell, a mom, actress, and author of her new children's book. And the whole book celebrates neurodiversity in really wonderful ways, goes through explaining it to children, talking about it to kids, and is just such an awesome topic that is based off of her own daughter. So, we're going to jump right into it. Unless you've written a children's book, you don't really fully understand how much time, energy, and effort goes into putting out a children's book, especially about a subject that is, one that's kind of near and dear to your heart, like this one is. And it's like you look at these, I look at children's books now so differently from having my own experience where I'm like,
Yes,
you know, these numbers and like the font and these pictures, like all of this took so much time and
so much
energy.
thought. Yeah,
And now it's out, which must feel like such a huge accomplishment and relief almost to you.
you're right. I think, because it is such a personal subject that is a big part of our family and me as a parent, frankly. Nova's condition, she has epilepsy, generalized epilepsy, just to give some context, which means it doesn't go away. She has a genetic mutation and she's currently seizure free. But the way that what's beautiful and confounding about the brain, as I've learned through Nova's journey, is that it is not predictable. so
Yeah.
that's the good news and the bad news. So, you can kind of just respect it. And that's kind of where I am with all of our brains. And after all, I think certainly when I think about all about brains, um, what I really set forth doing, which was, and as you can understand, it's we all imbue different secrets in our brain, right? Maybe some that we don't even know about, and
Yeah.
we're not, the way that we tick and that we move and how we navigate and move through um, our lives um, is is all deeply unique. And also, what I find is that my children, I've learned so much through how they are functioning. And so I was really inspired by this idea of like, hey, can we just like have a conversation? Can we have a book that um, bravely says all the real words versus sort of like this dinosaur is a little different than this little dinosaur. It's like, no,
Yeah.
what if they're just kids and they are really talking, they're saying the big words like epilepsy and autism and obsessive compulsive disorder. I really liked the idea of being able to use those real words and allowing for them to be in the room, to be front and center, so that they don't feel so secretive and mysterious in a negative way, that they are something to be proud of, and to understand that, yes, sometimes some of these conditions can be scary, embarrassing, uncomfortable, such as life, and
Totally.
and they can also be a superpower. And that's just good old fashioned true.
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I thought the book was great. I read it, and I'm like, I'm in the thick of children's books that I'm reading to my kids. So for me, this was, it was such. I always love books that have, that are teaching moments or
Yeah,
conversation starters. I think those are, especially as my kids get older, I always think about, what's a question that would come out of this page or
right.
this book. What has your daughter thought, and what have you as a parent kind of gone through to put this book out? Because I imagine you were really thoughtful and mindful with everything.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just to speak to Nova's, condition, what was really hard, I think, in the beginning is that we're just afraid, right? Like, say, if you're
Right.
a parent and your child is diagnosed with something that maybe you don't know much about, and because that was certainly me. I was like, I don't know anyone
Of
with
course.
epilepsy. I don't even know what this was the first time seeing a seizure in someone, and it's this little creature that you love and can't, it's just, you feel you feel scared as a parent.
Mhm.
You feel really isolated. Um, And then your child feels isolated because they're thinking, I'm the only one in the world who has this, you know? And on top of it, you know, when there is a neurological difference that requires medication, that in itself is a huge journey and can be almost one of the more painful parts of it, because you must experiment, which is not something you want to do with your child, but you do
Mhm.
want relief, and you do want to figure out a way to handle it literally and logistically. But then there's the emotional piece, which is how are we how are we talking about our differences in the house? How are we talking about them as we walk through the world? Are we hiding them? Are we a little shameful? Are we trying to make it better so we're pretending it's not there? Like there's all these ways and these tactics to manage. Um, some you kind of do them knee jerk, like you're not even aware, you know. And I think how we emotionally evolved together as a family in our relationship to Nova having epilepsy was really a growing moment for all of us, because
Mhm.
at first it the narrative was epilepsy is scary, you know, seizures are scary, therefore seizures are bad, therefore we need to get rid of these bad things, let's try this, let's try that. So that eventually Nova, if she had a seizure, would say, sorry. And we were like, okay, wrong narrative.
Right, of
It's
course.
really time. We gotta, I literally put my filmmaker storyteller hat on and was like, Scott and I, my ex-husband and I are great co-parents, you know, teammates. And we were like, we got to change the narrative. We got to figure this out. And so I did some research and realized, you know, in the research that Joan of Arc was said to have epilepsy. And Nova at the time loved Frozen. And there's this moment where there's a portrait, I think it's in Frozen too. There's a portrait of Joan of Arc, and they sing and they go, and Joan, you know, they say Joan, they reference her. And she knew about that warrior girl. Anyway, so you know, I took Nova aside and I remembered the moment where we were in the house, and I was like, I just want to let you in on something that I just found out about. I was like, so, you know, Joan of Arc, do you know who she is? She was like, I think so. I was like, she's that warrior, young girl warrior who wore all the like armor and rode a horse and had like a huge sword and like wielded it and like protected her people. And like, I obviously didn't talk about the burning at the stake part. I just took all the good stuff. And I was like, here we go. Okay, that woman, that young, fierce girl had epilepsy. And she was like, no. And I said, yes. And I was like, I
Wow.
just realized it just means you're a little fiercer than other people, like Joan.
Yeah.
And I was like, people with epilepsy, I just found out that like all these other leaders and extraordinary thinkers. And then I talked about Napoleon. And once again, didn't get into the dark stuff, or Edgar Allan Poe. But the point is, a lot of great original thinkers have had epilepsy, and so
Yeah.
and seizure disorders. And the truth is, it is a bit sparklier. It's a bit smart. It's a bit fast moving. A lot of things are going on electrically in your head, and so when you have a spark, when you have a mini, which is what we used to call the smaller seizures, I was like, when you have one of those, that's just you being extra
Yeah.
smart today.
Wow.
And so instead of sorry, you know, it turned into, Mom, guess what? I just had a mini. And I'm like, oh, look who's sparkling. Everyone watch out, you know. Look, Nope's coming in hot, you know. So it became a real reframing, which allowed for her to have this sense of like, oh, okay, you know, I can do this. This is cool. This is special and cool. And that was a big turning point. So she felt comfortable enough to bring it to share day one day, where you're allowed to share either and this comes back to the book, but really it was during COVID, where we all had like Zoom school, and she had to share something and share day, the sad Zoom share. And, people were kind of, oh, this is a picture of my grandmother. Oh, that's really cool, and here's, my pet dinosaur, and then Nova was like, I have a share, I have epilepsy.
Totally
Um,
like unprompted.
well, it was okay. So this is very cool, actually. The Epilepsy Foundation for Children has these little badges that you can earn if for education, advocacy, et al. There's a couple of other ones too, and with your epilepsy. Your epilepsy foundation lanyard, you can get these little badges. And so I sort of turned to Nova and I was like, oh, it would be cool. You could get your education badge if you wanted to share it. And this is just part of that narrative, which was like, oh, it's something to be proud of. So like it's something that's like not weird, it's not
Yeah.
unusual, it's not weird. And so she was like, yeah, I like that idea. So she bravely took it upon herself to feel comfortable enough to say it to 15 kids or whatever, on Zoom. And thank God the teacher, I remember she said it, and the teacher lagged back and allowed for there to be an organic conversation among children at 6 years old,
Wow.
talking about, well, what's a seizure? And Nova sort of said, well, epilepsy, is kind of like our brains have these electrical current, electrical wires that gets crossed. And then it causes me to have a seizure. And then they'd say, well, what's a seizure? And then she was like, well, it's kind of like sometimes I fall over and I'm unconscious, but then sometimes I just stutter, and it just depends, because she would have 11 to 16 seizures a day at that
Wow.
point. And so, and then of course the kids are like, well, that sounds kind of scary. She's like, well, I guess sometimes it is scary, but, also, um, it's just kind of who I am, and it's just a part of me. But lots of people have epilepsy. I'm not like the only person or whatever, and so she ended up kind of taking ownership of it, comfortable with the identity of it. And from that point on, she feels very comfortable talking about it. And she's had to go through, walking through Target with her, 72-hour EEG cap on with a computer attached to her, and I always have been encouraging her, where she would be so embarrassed, I got to stay in my room. Nobody come to my room. And I'm like, look, what's the worst that's going to happen? She's like, everyone's going to look at me. And I said, well, okay, guess what? They're going to look at you, and then they're going to look away and forget about it in 5 seconds. Yes, people look at you, they look at you. Oh, what's that? I don't know. Anyway, oh, fart, 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 fart. Like they're just thinking about themselves. Like people, they take 5 seconds, if
Right.
that, 1 millisecond, maybe they look and then they move on.
Yeah.
And the truth is, everybody's walking around, and sometimes you can't see the neuro differences, which is what's interesting about them. Is
Hmm.
like, I'm dyslexic. You don't see my dyslexia as I walk in the room, But if you ask me to spell dyslexia, I'm going to be upset about it because it's the worst possible word for a dyslexic person. Um, but the point is like, we can allow for these kind of, it's like a generosity of spirit. Like, I just want to let you know, Nova, more than half of the people here have a something. We all have a something.
Yeah.
It's different shades. Some is more severe. Some you might say, oh, I can really tell that, this person's having a tough time. Like one of her best friends is autistic. And so there are certain things that we do accommodate. If we're doing like a play date or a sleepover, it's like we accommodate because
Yeah.
we kind of go, okay, like these are the noises she likes, these are the noises she doesn't like, and yet they're two peas in a pod,
Right.
and Nova actually gets to have a cocktail of other neuro differences as well. Dyslexia she got from me, and a little anxiety from her pediatric epilepsy. So I think, and ADHD. So she, it's like she is well versed in just managing and having to learn new tools constantly, mining for new tools, and as a parent too.
What has this experience been like for you as a mother, having this be an unexpected experience. And then also, I'm sure, learning from your daughter with how she talks and celebrates it.
Yeah, I mean, I I think early on, when you have a child with some either physical or neurological difference, you are thrusted into the privilege of knowing that you can never be perfect
Mm.
and that you're not perfect. And please, for the love of God, do not model perfection. like, because it's just a road to nowhere, and I feel very strongly to really work against, and anything that kind of feels like we've all been conditioned that we have to be perfect at everything, and that whether it's as a woman, looks, and how you juggle everything, and how you balance, and how you,
The alleged balancing act.
Jesus Christ. I mean, really. And, how to be good, and how to, it's just exhausting. And, especially for my daughter, I feel it's, because sometimes, oh, wow, you've done this and you've done that. And I'm like, yeah. And also, like, I'm divorced, I love my ex-husband. We work really hard at that. Like, we
Yeah.
go to therapy and it's uncomfortable, and, it's not something that came naturally, and he'll say the same thing, but all the things that, I mean, our industry was a mess in the past 5 years. Let's be honest. Like, it's just, I think having a daughter, yes, with a condition that I had to learn about, and Scott and I both, my ex and I, really um were in the trenches together and figuring out how to make her as comfortable as possible within the condition, and ultimately found a medication that actually got her seizure free, and then we titrated off, and she's currently not taking meds for that, um but then there's other things that show up, like, here's a new thing, which is really having pretty acute anxiety, which is stems from a lot of pediatric epileptic patients, because if you are just forming how you're thinking, and at some point today you're going to be zapped and stopped full in mid sentence 11 to 16 times a day, you don't know when it's going to come, that's going to cause a lot of anxiety in somebody who's already sensitive. There have been so many things that are imperfect, and yet I feel, I tend to try to, my mantra is always like, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I say that to my kids too. I'm like, when she's feeling so much anxiety, I'm like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. It's right here. Like, so
Yeah.
in all of the mess and the mud of it, this is it. This is so good. This is great. Like, you're allowed to live in the mud, and it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you might have to take a shower after.
For me personally, when I have written a book, I have felt that it was an incredibly therapeutic process, that it was almost like, okay, I intended to put this book out there to like give it to some children, but also it allowed me to walk through certain things, or reflect on beautiful memories or beautiful times, or learn something that was harder that I
Yeah.
didn't know that I needed to learn through the book process. And this can be for children's books or adult books. Did you have that experience of it being a therapeutic time for you to get this book together? Because what I will say for people who haven't read it is, it really touches on everything that you would think about a kid asking you about, prompting. Like, it goes through it all in a really creative way that isn't leaving parents or caregivers with unanswered questions or explanations about a variety of different neurodivergent celebrations. So it's, how has that been for you to write and get all of these details out?
Yeah, I mean, it is therapeutic. I think that, you write and put out into the world the book that you wish you had. I certainly think of that in movie storytelling in general. I write things that I want to see. One of my own personal mantras is, yeah, what do I want to see next? And so with this one, I really felt like, gosh, I wish I had this book when when we were growing up with
Hmm.
these differences. And I want to I wanted to create something that, yes, I could kind of express something that I feel there was a dearth of in the available to parents. And the idea that we could, like, when you're reading it, I'm sure you saw this too. It's not like, and when you were done reading it, did you have a good conversation? It's like, no, no, throughout
Yeah,
you're just
definitely.
having lots of conversations throughout, and sometimes it's about dinosaur farts, and
Yeah,
sometimes it goes back to, you know well, what does that mean? Or does Simone Biles really have that condition? And
right.
I think that what I noticed in reading it to classrooms, that was the coolest part of it, because there were so many, like, hands coming up to be like, oh, I have that,
Right.
and proudly, oh, I have, there was one kid who said, oh, I have ADHD, or I have that too, and then, oh, I have autism, I have that. That's why I wear headphones, literally. It was just this wonderful kind of ping ponging of shares
Yeah.
happening organically in the classroom. So I hope also that educators too can allow for it to be something very authentic and earnest, to create real meaningful conversations. And then I remember even the feeling in my body, like, having these kids share this out loud. It's almost like I just felt they were so brave to just say that, and the other kids kind of looked to them and kind of went, oh, it's interesting. It was so Everything felt so fair, like,
It
you're
must be
just
emotional for you.
it
Like it must,
was it's
yeah.
like, I'm like, oh my goodness, I mean, even my daughter who's 10, reading it with her bestie who's autistic. It's like, they're reading it and they're like, oh yeah, that yes, actually that's how I feel about things,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So what is it like when, you go to see a movie, or, it was just like a safe place. It made it safe to just talk about things that I hadn't heard. It's not in the curriculum, as it were,
Mhm.
so it
Yeah.
allows to be this, like, extra thing that it's like, oh yeah, we live as we brush our teeth in the morning. If you have ADHD, that's a different experience, than someone who doesn't. And it just allows for us to kind of think about the mundane and the everyday and how we move through the world. And for kids, they have the capacity to think like that. And why not seed it now?
Well, it also, it allows for children to grow up with compassion and empathy and also understanding that, everyone is different. There's no one who doesn't have something. And,
Yeah.
it all looks different for everybody, but being understanding and welcoming and, and kind towards all of that is really, I feel like as parents, all we can ask for our kids to grow up in a world like that. What
100%.
what has your daughter thought about? I mean, the book comes out today, so it's like, this is all so new. But what has she thought about you putting the book out? And is there any like excitement or nervousness for you as a parent or for your family?
She came with me, to the morning. I'm doing the morning show circuit, and she came with me this morning, and it was definitely fun, having her there with, like, Gail King, who just fresh from space, reading the book. And so Gail was like, "Oh, you're Nova," and she was
Yeah.
like, "Yes, yes." Yeah. So I think she she doesn't have an ounce of shame about, telling the world that she has epilepsy. I
Mhm.
think, I think I can see her understanding the power of sharing. And so for that reason, I think she feels really excited. It wasn't there was she said, we walked by a bookshop today, that's like a little neighborhood shop, and she was like, Mom, go ask if they have your book. And I was like, I think it's too small. of a shop, but okay, and it's a really groovy shop. And so I went in, I was like, hey, I was like, Nova, you ask. I can't do it.
That's
And
so
she goes,
sweet.
no, ask. I was like, do you have the new picture book that came out today called All About Brains? And they were like, oh no, we don't have that. We can order it for you though. It can be here in 2 days. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And I'm like, am I gonna buy my own book now? You know?
Yes.
So I'm probably gonna buy my own book. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's such a fun experience to be able to do that. And my girls are younger, um,
How
but
old are
it's
they?
like they are 4.5 and about to be 3.
Oh,
And then I have a 5-month old
what? Holy,
and a 12-year-old stepson. So it's like
well,
being able to, have these experiences, like, and share them with your children
yeah,
is so special. And I remember when like my mom came out with her children's book, it was like, it's like a different. You're so proud of your parents and you look
yeah.
up to your parents already, but then you're like, oh my gosh, like this is like my mom's book came out last week and I was like going to every bookstore and I'm like, do you have the book? Do you have the book? So
Oh,
it's
my mom bought so many copies.
yeah, it's like it's such a fun experience to have with your kids, but it's going to be really amazing. Like I'm super excited for you to be able to go around and share this book with other parents, and I'm sure it will be such a beautiful experience for you to be able to connect also with other parents and
Yeah.
see what I'm imagining would be such a sense of community and also relief that you are tackling a subject that for so many is so anxiety causing as parents, and
Yeah.
also be able to do it in a way where you're talking about it as like a superhero or a superpower type of a thing that you know would allow parents to feel like thank you for doing this and putting that messaging out there. I mean, like it's a big subject that you're tackling.
I feel it. I mean, Dr. Maureen Doon, who is someone I consulted heavily through just the accuracy of how I'm depicting each neurological difference. And it was helpful and validating to allow for her to say, no, we're on the right page here. This
Mhm.
I would shape this a little bit, but generally speaking, the way that I heard children speaking of it was accurate.
Mhm.
And um I definitely like talking to other, like, actual children in trying to describe their own neurological differences and diversities, how it shows up. What does it feel like? For instance, I was curious, like, what does it feel like to have a seizure? I
Yeah.
don't I don't know what that feels like. And sometimes Nova will be sentient in them. She'll be awake, as it were, when they're happening. And so she could explain what it feels like. And I'm like, even adults don't know the answer to that. So it would be helpful. You're less afraid if you can understand and, again, have that compassion for what it feels like.
Mhm.
Um, so that was really interesting. By the way, she said it feels like, just so you know, it feels like kind of tingling and numb in the mouth, because that's where, in her brain, that's where her misfire is,
Mhm.
around kind of like mouth, language. And so when she would get these stutter seizures called myoclonics, and they would show up as a kind of like that. And so that was what those felt like. And then she said when she has grand mal seizures, it just feels like the plug, someone pulled the plug.
Mhm. When you think about, all the things that you have going on and just, of course, motherhood um, being such a driving force with what you're doing and life in general. And we, made fun of the alleged balancing act because there is no such thing of life
Yeah.
and motherhood. How do you stay centered and present and calm in your experiences in life and also in motherhood?
I mean, first of all, I've never lost my temper in my whole life except when I became a parent. So I say that because I just want to I
Funny.
just like, because I am calm as a cucumber. Like, I might talk fast and be able to craft ideas very quickly, but I will run in the opposite direction for anything. I'm like conflict avoidant.
Yeah.
I don't want to fight. Um, and I go to therapy for that. But with my children, they fight all the time. And the reason why I'm bringing this up initially is because it is like I'm coming clean that like it's hard, and
Mhm.
especially being single mom, and mom gets the real dose,
Right.
of like how can we push mom, and
Right.
we know that we are so safe with mom that we are gonna unleash the wrath of like pushing boundaries.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've grown so much as a person in my parenting, and mainly because you get pushed, and I am pushed also from an emotional standpoint. Yes, dealing with unexpected medical things, but then just as you come up against things on a daily basis that you're like, I did not schedule this, this meltdown. This meltdown is fully not in the iCal, and that kind of pressure and the fights between my kid can totally get me to a place of like, that's enough,
Yeah.
just a sound that I never knew I had. So I feel like that's growth because then I found myself kind of like, wow, I just found a voice that I didn't even know I had. And now I'm like with these people that I love dearly, and I go, listen, hey, I just want to let you know I totally lost it there. I,
Yeah.
I was like, that was loud. That was loud. That was genuinely like I was upset, and now I'm here, and I just want to like look at you guys in the eyes and say, when you do this, I think I lose my ability to stay centered and cool. Um, and so I should have taken a deep breath. And sometimes I take a minute. So I'll be like, all right, I got to take a timeout. Like I do that, so that I can model that when I tell them to take a minute, I, I'm like, I need a minute sometimes too. No one's in trouble. Like just take a freaking minute.
Mhm.
And so um to keep myself actually centered though, I totally do yoga. I read books. Like I have my books that I read that are purely for me, that are not like the books you should read. They're like cool female fiction, like contemporary fiction. I do ceramics, like, when I have time, I like to go do ceramics, and I have my little like um I like bell clay. It's great. And then so I play with dirt basically. And then I meditate and I do yoga. I do things that I can give myself this sort of hug of time, where I'm like, this is my time, and I also try to think of things that my kids can look at me doing for myself. And because I used to never read. And then when you start having a kid that you want to show them that reading is good, you're like, that you want them to not lean into their goddamn iPad or, device. You can't tell them to read if you're not reading.
Mhm.
It's just ridiculous. And so I
Yeah.
was like, what am I doing? I'm like checking, if I'm on my device, then they're going to want to be on their device. So
Yeah.
that has been, I know, will be a lifelong thing, certainly until they leave the house. But it actually inspired me to kind of pick up books in a way that was so much more meaningful than it ever has. So um, I feel like I'm swirling in other people's stories all the time, and it's been really helpful for my own well-being.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I love the messaging there of like, practice what you preach with
Yeah.
your children because it is so important, whether it's screen time or how you talk or relate to your own feelings or emotions or
Yeah.
relationships, like all of these things. I started meditating last summer and I had my daughter the other day and she said, I'm going to go and meditate. I was like,
Yeah.
you go, girl.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
You
do
need to
that.
meditate. Yeah,
Yeah,
I got
you
you.
need
I'll
to
keep
do
it
that right
quiet.
now on the play structure. Go ahead and do that.
Totally.
Well, this is so amazing, and I'm so happy for you, and congratulations because that's such a big
Thank you.
accomplishment to actually have the book finally like be
I,
out there and available to people. And I know that the day the book comes out is such a chaotic day of just like back to back things, but it's so important to just take a moment and realize what an accomplishment that is, because it's, you know, it's
Yeah,
a really
I'm here
big
with my
deal.
mom too. My mom took
Aw.
Nova out for like, I don't know, they went somewhere crazy just to, give me some space to do some of these interviews. But I really appreciate the support I do, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad your kids enjoyed it, and yeah, I can't wait for more and more people to read it.